Hi everyone, it's Sallya from HustleSZN, and today I finally wanted to bring you my Witch-A-Thon wrap-up. Are we currently doing Yule-a-thon? Yes, but I figured better late than never. Yule-a-thon ends on a Persian holiday anyways, so I was like, at least this is an opportunity while Witch-A-thon spirit's still high, I can just do my wrap-up. Okay, let's just get started. I guess I'll start by saying what stuff I didn't do. So in the end, I didn't do the buddy read. I didn't do the group read. I also didn't read a book by the candlelight. The other thing too is I actually only read like maybe 100 pages total during the actual readathon, and I had kind of done something for myself where I was basically going to read over the course of October because I knew I wouldn't really get to reading all that much. But anyways, let's get to the books that I did read. So I'm going to start with my favorite of all of them, and that is A Very Large Expanse of Sea by Tahereh Mafi. I read this for the challenge about your ancestors because it's about a Persian girl. This book was everything for me. It was so good. I also want to say that I got to go meet Tahereh Mafi in New York, and I got her, oh, my book's upside down. I got her to sign the cover for me in Farsi. Oh wait, how can I? Yeah. So that's my name. That's my name in Farsi. That's her signature. She wasn't 100% sure how to write it, so I had to kind of write it on my arm to make sure that she spelt it correctly. I think by now a lot of people know what the story is about, but it's basically this Persian girl who wears a hijab and is kind of living in a post 9/11 world, and it's just her life in high school and like how she deals with things. It was so good. It was so nice. Like the representation was something I've obviously never seen because I hadn't read a book about a Persian, although I have heard of a couple books featuring a Persian, but I don't know, this was my first experience actually reading one, and I absolutely loved it. It's really fast-paced, so I think a lot of people that I've heard at least kind of thought that it was almost too fast-paced and like she could have drawn it out more and that she could have explored things a bit more, but I actually felt like the fact that she doesn't necessarily explore everything and she just kind of presents you her life as if it's just straight up facts hits home a bit more. Like I think that's part of the message is what I'm trying to say. I thought the fact that she doesn't bother to try to explain it for you and she's not trying to get you to understand what her experience was, she's just like laying it out for you. I actually thought that that had more of an impact, and I kind of liked that a lot because I think if she bothers to try to explain it, it'll either come off preachy or it'll, you know, like feel like she's trying to school you, and I didn't think that she was trying to do that at all. She literally was just trying to show you like, this is how my life was, and like this is the type of things that these people face, and you may or may not know about it, and you don't need to understand it, but you just need to acknowledge that that is how it is. There's scenes where she gets Ocean, who's the main love interest, to recognize his own privilege, and I thought those were really well done because I feel like if you're not a hetero white male, then you know that other people have privilege, but you just don't know necessarily how to articulate that, and it's not like we all have these examples at the tip of our tongue ready to present to you about why you have privilege. Like it's just, everybody knows it exists, even though we can't articulate it or even fully understand how and when and where it's occurring. You just kind of recognize that that's a truth. And a lot of people don't recognize it because it's so inherent in like our society, and I thought she did a really good job the few times where she does show it to Ocean. Obviously it was super cool to have like Persian phrases and just like cultural things in this book that I could personally relate to on a level that like no other book would ever give me. Like no book is gonna have Persian sayings, you know what I mean? Or even talk about Persian food. Like that is something, and she acknowledges it in the book, that most people don't even know what Persian food is. A lot of times people assume that it's either like Indian food, so like spicy and curries and stuff, or they assume it's more like Mediterranean, Middle Eastern food, which is like shawarma or hummus or things like that, and it's actually neither of those things. And unless you have Persian friends, or unless you for some reason have interacted with Persians, like you wouldn't know because it's straight up like not advertised anywhere almost, and there's not a whole, I don't know about the whole world, but like I don't think there's a huge Persian food scene or anything like that. So it's just, it was nice to also see that represented. Yeah, I don't have too much critical analysis to give of the book. I think this kind of relates back to the fact that she doesn't draw things out too much and she doesn't over explain things. So even though it was like a really heavy topic, the book didn't feel depressing. Obviously my opinion is going to be super biased because I loved it before going into it, just because it's about like a first gen Persian girl, but it shows you diversity without like shoving it down your throat, which is what I like. And it like maintained a lot of her artsiness and the beauty of it. And if you are a Tahara Mafi fan, like I literally can't find a reason why you wouldn't enjoy this book. If anyone has read this book and didn't like it quite as much, like please let me know. I'd like to know why, or what about it you didn't necessarily like, or if you loved it, feel free to gush about it down below because I'm always down for that. The first book that I attempted to read was Toil and Trouble. I knew that I don't really like anthologies, so I was like, why not take the book that I'm least likely to like and just try to finish it as soon as possible. I DNF'd this book after story, I think I was in the middle of story 5, and I knew that I should DNF it once I got to the 5th story. I'm reading it and I finished it, and if you asked me what the 5th story was about, I still don't really know. You know, I realized that I was just forcing myself to read it, and I like truly hate it. I didn't like any of the stories. Generally speaking, I thought that the short stories would be easier because it'd be less time to read them, but I actually found it was harder than reading like a full-on story because I felt like as soon as I got a bit invested and as soon as I finally understood what was going on, it would end and then I'd have to restart and reorient myself. So it actually felt like I was doing 4 or 5 times the amount of work that I would in just a single book. You'd think that in a short story, by the first paragraph, you would know what's going on, but a lot of the times it took me just as long as it would for a normal book for me to finally get what was happening. Sometimes I wasn't even oriented by the time the story ended. So there were so many cool concepts, and if you told me like those were the themes, I'd be like, yeah, I'm all for that. But I think it requires a lot of talent for you to adequately explore those topics in a short story. For me, most of these stories did not do that. I also, for a lot of these stories, like didn't quite understand how they were witchy. Like some of them were so loosely witchy, and maybe that's just again my understanding of witchiness, but like going into it I definitely felt like I was gonna get more of it and I didn't necessarily get that. The second story I actually liked a bit more, and the only reason was because it was about a midwife and I'd done Obsgyne and like what she was talking about and doing with the problem the baby was facing and like correlate that to whatever knowledge I had, and so that part was interesting. And I also like the idea that witches in the past being highly educated women. Like a lot of the people who were prosecuted, I don't know if prosecuted is the right word, a lot of people who were deemed witches, I guess, were like higher educated women, and I always thought that was really fascinating. And to think that potentially, like, you know, being in med school, like would I have been considered a witch if I healed somebody? Who knows? Actually, speaking of, there's a book, Mistress of the Art of Death, is a book that I read many years ago, so I can't really fully remember if it's good or not, but I remember really liking it. And it's about a woman who she studies at some fancy medical school in Italy, I believe, and it's the only place that allows women into medical school. And then she helps with a murder mystery where, because she's a doctor, she's able to like do some forensic science stuff with the dead bodies or the victims and try to solve the murder mystery. But while she's doing it, she has this sidekick, if you will, that she brings with her, who's this Arabic guy. I don't remember what he is, but he's just like a regular Arabic guy, and she makes him speak in Arabic to her, and she pretends to just translate what he's saying so that people don't think that she is a witch. They think that she's just doing what she's being told by the male doctor who doesn't speak English. It's fascinating. It was more interesting than book 2. So if you want that concept, I would highly recommend this book. And then I decided to pick up The Wicked Deep. I read like a page of this and then I was like, I wasn't totally feeling it, so I was like, I'll come back to this. But I ended up instead going and watching this documentary on YouTube that was, I think it's 2 45-minute episodes, all about the witch hunt and the original witch hunt, like not the Salem witch hunt, but the one in the UK, which actually started it all, or like is the major one. I don't know that necessarily started it all. And anyways, I kind of realized that the history of it is what I found most fascinating, and that none of these books really touched upon that, which is like what I would have wanted out of this. So I went and watched this documentary and it was so fascinating, and you guys should totally watch it. I don't know what about it, but it really hit me like how ridiculous this whole thing was and how like scary it was, because if you think about it, would I have been considered a witch if I was there? Like it totally could have been me. It could have been somebody I knew, and it was so scary. I thought also that it was only women that were considered witches, but in the documentary there were cases where it was males as well. So I don't fully know exactly, but I think mostly it was women. And it's just like, it's so insane. They essentially thought that the devil and I guess their mom or somebody had sex and then they were the child of the devil. There were so many things that if they could show or prove made you a witch, that was evidence enough. One of the biggest ones was the birthmark. So if they suspected that you were a witch and then they decided to like do a body search of you and they found any sort of like mole or any sort of birthmark, and there's so many dermatologic conditions, so like this is ridiculous, then they could say you're a witch. And like it doesn't even really make sense, because how many guys also have the same mark and yet it's never used against them? It's scary how not rational this was and how many people suffered because of this. And like they would describe how they would torture the women. They weren't allowed to like there were laws about what constitutes torture, and so they would try to torture you within the limits of the law, because if they, like for example, like let's say whipping was considered torturing, if they did that and got an answer, it wouldn't be a legal answer. So they'd have to do something that wasn't considered torture by the law, but that was still a form of torture to get the answer out of you. So one of the things they did is they wouldn't let you sleep, and then they would just like drag you across the room, and so you'd be sleep deprived for like multiple days at a time, and eventually they would try to get you to confess. Obviously under those circumstances so many people would confess, because I don't know, you're like basically delirious, you haven't slept, you're probably like, you feel like you're dying, and at that point, like, you know what I mean? I feel like you're already gonna die anyways, so like you might as well confess. And then they were allowed to like hang you, burn you, whatever they chose to do. And it was so messed up. The more you watch it, the like scarier it is. And it's just like, it's really heart-wrenching to see that these many people suffered because of literally, in my opinion, just like society's stupidity. There was so many interesting stuff. Like it would talk about how someone, if a woman like made a curse and then that person like happened to collapse, they would blame the woman. But like now that we know more about medicine, it like, I think one of the things they showed is that one of the accounts just sounded like the guy was actually having a stroke. What are the chances? You know what I mean? Like what if that man had epilepsy and you cursed him and then he falls down seizing and like, you know what I mean? I'd just be like, oh my God, like, was that me? Like, it's fascinating and also terrifying at the same time to think about it. And I think the scariest part, like the part that really got me the most, was that in the end, what ended the witch hunt was the fact that it was costing towns too much to hold the trials. It wasn't the fact that they were killing the women, it wasn't the fact they were torturing all these people, like it was literally the fact that it cost too much. And so towns were going bankrupt trying to kill all the witches in their town. Especially because there was this one guy who was like the main witch hunter, and he would charge a lot, obviously, and the better he got at his job, the more people like he found, and he was trying to make business grow. And you know, as his business was growing, he would get it done faster and faster, and it would cost more and more money, and ultimately like it just started costing the town too much to hold the trial and then like set up whatever it is that they had to set up to kill the people. Really, like that's what stopped you in the end? It's just, it's really like to think about that, like as a society we did that. But back to The Wicked Deep. It started off, I actually really liked it in that it was very easy to get into. It kind of reads like a W Network film, or I guess for Americans the equivalent of a Hallmark film, although I don't really know what exactly that means. But for me, it's the equivalent of the movies that play on the W Network on the weekend mornings, where it's like, it's not like very good, but it hits all the spots that it's supposed to hit, so you kind of like it, and it's just like enjoyable time. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like a fluffy movie, so this is kind of like a fluffy book, but autumn edition because of the atmosphere and the witches and like just the scene, the setting, etc. The thing though is like the more I read it, I actually by the end of the book I didn't quite like it as much, and there were a couple reasons for that. Just starting off, the characters are kind of meh to begin with. Like the main character, I think her name is Penny, is like the most average person ever, but like not even in a good way. Like she just like truly, in my opinion, had no personality, and she has a bit of a gift in the book, and if she didn't have that gift, like she truly would have been useless. So I don't know. And like even Beau, the love interest, just seems so like, he kind of made me think of like a love interest out of the Hannah Montana movies or like The Last Song. Kind of like a southerny, good-looking guy who literally does nothing but happens to be a handyman and can like help the protagonist in like sexy ways. So in the end I didn't like it too much. And then also at first when I was reading the book, I thought that it might be better as an adult contemporary because I thought that would let it explore themes of femininity and like feminism and just like cooler topics than if it was YA, because I think so much about witches that is fascinating is like trying to explore some of the social commentary on it as well. And I didn't think that you were able to do that with the YA protagonist. So I thought at first it would have been better as an adult novel. But then I don't know, like the more I got into it, you actually get a bit more romance and stuff. And like for me, the romance just like killed this book. I don't even know. Like there was some really cringy stuff that happened. I wrote down some quotes. So this one is written as he's contemplating, like Bo is contemplating killing somebody. The main girl writes, "He smells like the earth. He smells wild and fearless, and I know he could also be dangerous, but when I'm this close to him, I don't care what he is." So I don't know, I can't really support that. And then when they're like getting into their steamy scenes, constantly they will say heat pours into her from him, like, and the deeper that he kisses her, the more heat is being transferred. So I just like didn't know if this was a figurative way of telling us that like he's breathing into her, or if like I was supposed to think that she's being aroused because the heat's pouring into her, or if like this is literally like him letting go of some fluids. I don't even know. But obviously like if you don't take the book too seriously, it's still enjoyable. But I also felt like as more twists occur in the plot, the book kind of lost its tone and sense of where it was going, and I felt like some of the characters didn't really stay true to their original motivations. I also felt like it was a bit predictable, but not in a good way, like kind of in like a, what's that book called? One of Us is Lying type way, in that you're like, oh really? Like this isn't where I wanted it to go. Yeah, and also like the romance is fairly insta-lovey, so if you're not into that, I don't think you'll appreciate their romance all that much. I think if you get over the fact that it's insta-lovey, there is some chemistry, and I actually thought that the romance was fun when it did happen, but just like it gets to be a bit too much in the books, especially when there's so many other cool things that this book has going for it, given like the setting and like the lore behind the witches and all that, and the fact that they choose to explore the romance more than all the other stuff, and like there's murder mysteries and things like that are also happening, and I don't know, like they just weren't afforded as much time as they could have been. I liked the book, but I wouldn't say go pick up this book if you have a long list of amazing things on your TBR. I guess if you really wanted an atmospheric read, potentially this could be a good book. I just think that there's probably something better out there, and I don't really recommend this book for anybody. So the last couple of books that I wanted to read for the Witch-A-Thon were All the Crooked Saints by Maggie Stiefvater. I read a couple pages of this, but I just like couldn't get into it during the readathon, so I stopped reading it and then switched to My Penny Dreadful. And I started reading the one about Sweeney Todd, and it was actually really interesting. It was just way longer than I had anticipated. It was like more of a full-blown book. Although I read a good... Okay, never mind. I read a solid 30 pages of this book. It was good. I really liked it. I probably should have finished it. It was more of like a classic in that the writing is kind of old school, which wasn't like bad necessarily, but I don't know. I was like coming home after 12-hour days and I was kind of tired, and I was like, this isn't really what I want to read. And then once Carms picked up, I just stopped reading it altogether. Yeah, I also like don't recommend this unless you're super into Sweeney Todd. So there's that. All the Crooked Saints I definitely still want to read, and at some point I definitely will. It wasn't what I wanted at the time, but I'm sure I will get to this very soon. Okay, that is it for my Witch-A-Thon wrap-up. Obviously, if any of you are participating in Yule-a-thon, I wish you all the best and good luck, and I'm sorry that I couldn't participate this time. And if you have read any of the books that I talked about and want to let me know what your thoughts were, make sure to leave them down below. Bye!